what does gutsy mean to you?
Gutsy for me is courage to act even when you have fear, which is maybe slightly below the level of acting. You can go above that fear and still do it.
You're listening to the Gutsy Podcast, where we talk about all things real, raw, and ridiculous about running a business authentically. Whether you need an inspirational pick-me-up or a swift kick in the mental ass, the Gutsy Podcast is your bi-weekly guide to getting out of your head and back into action. I'm Laura Ora, branding and mindset coach for female entrepreneurs, and your host on this journey through entrepreneurship. It's time to fuel your Gutsy. Your thoughts have the ability to change your life or to keep you stuck in the same cycle. The cycle that drains your confidence, stops you from fully living your life, and convinces you to keep doing the things that you know that you're ready to break free from. Today, you're going to learn simple ways to disrupt your thoughts and habits from behavior change specialist Chardét Ryel. Chardét is also a visibility mentor and podcast host of Feel Good Naked. For the last 11 years, she's worked to transform the way we talk to ourselves and treat our bodies through behavior change psychology. Her mission? Break the barriers holding women back from feeling powerful in their lives, minds, and bodies. And while we're on the topic of mind, the next Mindfuckery workshop happens this month from June 24th to the 28th. This is one of those workshops where I hear women come into it and they're like, I wasn't sure what to expect. I was really interested. I loved the title. I definitely want to get out of my own head, but I'm not sure how. And by the end of the workshop, they have transformed into a completely different version of themselves. They have the tools to know how to shift their mindset in the moment. They have built confidence. They have community. They're with like-minded women that get it and support them. And maybe most importantly, their self-belief again. Belief that they are worth making the change, that they can get out of the job that they don't love anymore, that they can make the relationship shift. I've watched it happen time and time again. These women come back alive, and I want that for you as well. If you know that you are made for more, but your brain wants to talk you out of it, go to lauraora.com/learn. The next workshop is open. Registration is available. All right, we're digging straight into the brain today, so let's get into today's episode. Hey, Chardét, welcome to the Gutsy Podcast.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited. I'm ready to bring out the boldness.
Oh, bring out the boldness. That's a title in its own. I love it. And we're talking today about something that is so near and dear to maybe everybody on the planet, but definitely the gals that are listening here on the Gutsy Podcast about disrupting your thoughts so that you can build your confidence and just be, right? So I'm excited to dig into this topic with you today. I know that behind every great story is a great story though. So I'd love to learn, tell me a little bit about you, your entrepreneurial journey. What's led you to where you are here with us today?
Yeah, sure. So I started, I don't want to say late because I know everyone starts at different ages, their business, but I had a whole corporate life before I started. And what didn't work for me was the burnout. So I did corporate for a little while. I was also in sales. So it was very high stress. And when your earnings are based only on commission for the most part, and you're living in New York City, you
that
are
says it all.
Exactly. Like you are hustling so much and you're working like there's no end. You're always trying to compete with not just competitors, but also your colleagues, fighting for the promotions, fighting for everything. And I just got to a point where I had a really bad boss incident and I also had a serious relationship end unexpectedly. And that was a whirlwind where I just felt like I can't do this tomorrow. The idea of me waking up and going into this job that I never liked anyway and trying to sell it to other people is just not going to happen. It's complete disalignment. So I gave them my notice, had to give them a month, but they luckily let me leave after a day. I think they noticed energy wasn't there. And I booked a trip to Brazil. I was like, I'm just going to go to Brazil and figure things out. I don't know what I'm going to do. the intention was not to be an entrepreneur. I always wanted to do that, but I thought you need to have more experience, you need to whatever, XYZ. And so I went to Brazil and I really just spent some time figuring out what I want to do. I took the time to relax, unwind, balance, do all the stuff I never had time to do because I was always working, see people, be outdoors, all of that. And it made me really interested in getting into wellness because that was what I was starting to do. And I just felt like a whole different person. So when I went back to New York, it was with this idea of I'm going to be an entrepreneur and I want to focus in this space because I want to help people never feel this way to the point that they have to quit or that they're going into a business already run down. And that has been the mission in different ways for 11 years now.
Wow, amazing.
Yeah.
So many great things in there. I'd love to know because I think that a lot of people get hung up in this section where you realize I don't want to work here anymore. I don't want to do this thing anymore, but I don't know what I'm going to do next. And so they choose to just stay because it's familiar and it's safe. What was that process like for you, or what happened that made you say, you know what, I don't know what I'm doing next, but I'm willing to find out?
For me, it was the pain of staying was greater than the pain of not knowing. And I'd like to have said I made it sooner. And I am in so much awe of those people who just say, I'm leaving. And it's not because it's so bad here, but I want something better. I think that's amazing, but that was not me. It took having this horrible, horrible boss situation. We had an argument about something where I had all the skills and he did not in that area. And he still felt like he was the one that should be taking over those accounts. And it made me realize that I'm never going to get ahead here. I'm always going to be fighting. I don't even like this job. The values of the company really didn't align. I was just paid really well. So, like, that's why I stayed. I was paid so well. We like stay because of the money, but it cost our soul sometimes. And that for me was the moment of, okay, it's not going to work. I'm just going to have to leave. And so I gave my notice without having a plan. And I'd like to say that, after Brazil, I came back and I immediately started my business. But no, like I still tried to do it on the side. And I spent 8 months job searching until it finally got to the point. It hit me of just start, just do it. Stop making excuses. Stop looking for other solutions. Just do it.
Isn't it funny how we avoid the thing that we know that we want, right? It's like our brains needs more justification or proof or answers or clarity. Or I know that a big one is needing to have it all figured out, right? The perfect plan, the right steps, who's going to do this? What's the formula? Like all that stuff. And we just keep building and creating on the side. Meanwhile, like you said, looking for another job where you have this epiphany, you have this moment where you're like, what the hell am I doing? Like, why am I trying to find something else when I know that this is the thing that I actually want to do?
Did you have this experience? It sounds like you did.
I'm familiar a handful of times, because I always tell my audience that the thing that you want the most is often behind the thing that you resist the most. That's a little bit of a mind fuckery that I always love to slide across the table to everybody, because the more you feel into that, you're like, oh my gosh, that is so incredibly right. But our brains get in the way, right? The thoughts that are going on in our heads talk us out of everything if we allow them to.
It's so much that, and it's all the things of looking of the validation that you get externally from the choices you've made versus the ones you haven't yet. So for me, it was the money, it was the ego, like I had this great job, it was I'm in New York, high flying, whatever. Like it was all this stuff that really didn't matter when I compared it with how miserable I was inside. But it's like you said, like you resist it and you feel this resistance, but you don't know how to let it go. And it usually takes a really big trigger moment, or you have to be super self-aware and take yourself on that journey. And I think that's where I like to bring people now, because I don't think it should take having a breakdown to get you to do what you love.
Yeah. So that perfect transition into the how, right? Like, so what are some techniques? What do you do, or how do you teach in that scenario? How do you
Yeah.
prevent that kind of breakdown moment? I mean, sometimes it's inevitable, right? We can't change what the universe already has in store, but there are things that we can do to not get to that point. So what are those things for you?
Yeah, the biggest thing is I call it like you have to have a regular mental decluttering technique. And this can be different things for different people, but it usually involves some form of introspection, which is scheduled. Not like, oh, I feel like I need to go to my therapist today. This is not that. It's a regular one because I recently did a podcast episode on this actually, where it was comparing your minds and the way we think to a really cluttered room. And if you think of a cluttered room, you're just going to continue adding stuff to it, and it just becomes less and less desirable for you to enter that room. So you have to go in and do that painful work of looking at each thought and each habit and seeing, does this belong here? Can I work on removing this? And that's extremely hard and painful to do, but it actually, in the long run, is a lot easier than no longer being able to fit in that headspace. So it is very much having, what's your regular decluttering technique? What is it? Like, is it therapy? Is it journaling? Is it regularly just checking in meditation? Is it a collection of this stuff? Is it having, do you ever read The Artist's Way?
I've not read that. No.
So this is an amazing book. Like everyone should read it. It's quite, I think it's pretty old now, but her whole philosophy is like beginning to open up the inner artist. And that doesn't need to be that your job is actually painting or whatever, but it's getting in touch with the creative spirit again, the energy, reconnecting with yourself, prioritizing yourself, letting go of all the opinions of others, that validation you seek. And one of the big things she has in there is to schedule an artist date every week with yourself. And you just go and do something that lights up your soul, something that lets you let things go. And you don't justify it. You don't say, costs too much. You don't say, I don't have time. You make it a very sacred practice. So it's these kind of techniques, the maintenance stuff, the unsexy stuff, that is going to make the most difference for everyone.
I think that you pointed out something really important here, and it's the unsexy stuff. Because we think that, we think about growing and healing and having the things that we want as this like big kind of finale, right? But truly and honestly, the only way to get to that is by doing the unsexy stuff. Healing and growing and shifting your thoughts and changing your habits. This shit does not happen overnight, and it's not pretty when it happens. You know what I mean? Like, I've never been like, oh, you know what I did today and it was so hot. I broke a habit. like like it's just not how it
I think it's
rolls.
hot. I mean, I think it's hot.
I mean, it is hot theoretically, but when you're in the moment, you're not sitting there being like, oh yeah, I broke a habit today, and maybe we could shift that, right? Like maybe that is the energy we start to pour into it. But the point is, it's not exciting. And I think that maybe that's why some people don't see it through. Do you feel that or see that as well?
Yeah, I think a lot of it too has to do with the marketing and the personal development and self-help space of, this is the special strategy to do this, and these are the 5 things, and this is going to change your mindset. But all of that stuff is just a fancy name for what we're already talking about, which is this deeper work. And I often think about it like, going back to that cluttered room, the way I clean that drives people crazy is I throw everything out. Like I literally throw stuff onto the bed, I put it all over. I need to see the mess in order to organize it.
Mm.
And that is really what this is. Sometimes you just have to go in to all of it and accept that it's going to be a really unpleasant experience, and then sort through. But again, like some people are different. Everyone cleans differently. Some people need to take one thing at a time and put it back. So it really depends on you. And I think that's also something of finding the approach that actually works for you specifically, not just taking something because I said it or someone else said it, but making sure it resonates with you.
And that's a whole topic in its own, right? It's like owning what is right for you, not doing what everyone on the internet is telling you to do, not doing the next trick in the next book. I think it's always great to be influenced, to be inspired, to see like maybe what options, especially if you're like, I literally have no idea. Right? Like I'm not really sure because maybe I've never done this before, or I've just this is just new to me, right? So I think it's great to be inspired, but at the end of the day, you have to you have to grab onto techniques that feel good to you, or at least feel interesting enough to stick with it.
Yeah. And allow time to integrate too, because a lot of times what we do is we listen to that podcast episode and then we go to the next one. We read the self help book and then we go to the next one. But there's no time to actually integrate what you've learned. And rewiring your thoughts and changing your habits doesn't work like that. I mean, imagine if you get this amazing habit that you start to do, and then immediately you go to the next one and you haven't allowed any time for it to just rest and go into your life. And so that is a big thing too, is like you really need at least, I would say, at least 4 weeks if you can, after reading a big book or something that really transforms you, before you go into the next thing. And we do this as entrepreneurs too, right? Like we buy the course, we buy the program, we do the next thing, we try the next strategy, and we never actually let it sit and play out first.
Why do we do that? Why don't we go deep into this stuff? Why do we just hop on to the next thing?
Because action is so much easier than doing something and seeing it possibly fail. That whole learning process we know is painful, that you learn to walk, you keep falling. You don't get to just stand up from crawling. And it's so much easier to just be like, well, let me shift to this instead. It feels like I'm doing something. And this is why you've probably felt this. I know I have. Lots of entrepreneurs of, you are always working on your business, and you're always working in your business but never on your business. So you're always doing the stuff, the admin stuff, the easy win stuff, the social media posts, but you're not actually thinking about the strategy and the bigger things around it, because it's more painful and the feedback is not immediate.
Hmm. The feedback is not immediate. That instant gratification. Look,
Yeah.
there's nothing better than crossing something off of a list. Don't get me
Are
wrong.
you are
Like,
you a list builder? Are
look,
you one?
I got one right in front of me. I like to see it. I like the satisfaction of checking it off.
Yeah.
But to your point, like I've had to notice that's a tendency of mine, is that like sometimes you just have to stop doing and you have to just embody and be, right? And I think that sometimes that gets skewed with like, okay, well now I'm just sitting around doing nothing. And I think that, you know, and that would be, I mean, it's kind of in the mind, it feels black or white, right? Like you're either busting your ass or you're doing nothing. What do you see as kind of that middle area? Like what is being, what is embodying to you? Like what are some things that you would do instead of hustling and doing this stuff all the time?
Yeah. It's kind of, it's this separation, because it's like you said, we like to have this dichotomy of it's this or that because it's easier for our minds to grasp. It's rest or it's action. But the third category really is reflection. And it's doing stuff which requires your mind to work for you to think. It's not like sitting down and watching Netflix where you don't need to think at all, which we still do it. We need those days. But it's still using the mind, but it's without the hustle and stress of work. So you don't have the same tight deadlines for this kind of work. You don't have the exact actionable steps. It's more like, the closest I can say to it is it's like flow state, but not for work, for really uncovering what you need to do in your business or in your life. And that only comes if you set that time aside. It doesn't come any other way, because if you think, oh, I'll get to it when I get to it, it never gets on your calendar ever.
It really doesn't. That's a perpetuating conversation with yourself. You know, it's almost like thinking, feeling, doing, reflecting, but without the expectation.
I like that.
You know, like we're taking out where we're going, we're taking out the what I have to do about this. And it's just I literally get my most brilliant downloads when I'm just sitting outside drinking coffee with a notepad. I always have a notepad with me because the second my brain gets away from all the stuff, It's like fantastic. I'm glad that you're finally here. I have a lot of things to share with you. And we haven't talked in like a week, so there's a lot. So get your pen fucking ready. You know what I mean? So I've learned that, but it's the intentional choice of going outside and sitting in the chair with the coffee and the notepad instead of popping onto email, instead of checking in on social media, right? And I think that is the barrier to breakthrough, right? That's where those thoughts, you're like consistently at a fork in the road. Talk to me about disrupting those thoughts. How do we start to break that and actually do the things that are beneficial to us in a different way?
Well, you gave a great example, which is how do you go from, okay, I could scroll social media or write this email or do this job, or I could go outside and have my tea or coffee in nature. And it's almost like we get into this, our minds make us think because it's easier to just keep doing the same thing, as you said, than disrupt. That's the whole problem. But our minds get into this position of they will actually convince you that going outside and having that tea is actually an inconvenience, that it will slow you down, that it's not going to make a difference, that you're not going to change your mind about anything. And we know it's almost as if, those times when you really don't want to go and say yes to your friends to do the thing, you're just not feeling it. And then you go and you feel so happy that you did. But in that moment, your mind has convinced you there is no benefit to you going out and doing it. And so it's almost as if the first step of disruption is you have to maybe not believe, but act as if you believe that that shift will make a difference. You have to say to yourself, okay, right now, we don't think going outside matters, but I'm going to do it. I'm going to suspend disbelief for a moment and try this thing. And the hard part is it doesn't get easier. You can work on this stuff all the time and you can still have that day where you feel like that. So it's continually remembering, I am going to have to say, I know that this will make me feel better. I might not feel it, but this is a case where you can't really trust your feelings.
I'm going to take you way, way, way behind the scenes here for a second. From the last mindfuckery workshop that I taught, one of the participants shared with me a screenshot of a conversation that she had with a friend during the workshop. Note, she has given me permission to share this with you. She says to a friend, the next workshop that Laura Ora has, I'm signing you up. And her friend says, has it been good? And she's like, yes. Also, I never knew that she's also intuitive. Her friend immediately comes back with, I just hate toxic positivity, so hopefully it's not full of that. And she responds with, oh my God, none of that. It digs deep, a no bullshit zone. I just really needed you to hear that because look, there's a lot of information out there, a lot of quick fixes, a lot of hacks, a lot of smoke ass blowing. And while some things can work, they end up being firework moments. The Mindfuckery Workshop is all about going deep, facing the shit that you don't actually want to face, but that's the stuff that's going to really free you. We focus on getting to the root of what's going on and then filling up that big, beautiful bucket of yours with tools, with accountability, with support, so that you not only know how to move forward, but it becomes your new normal. This is by far the most transformative workshop that I teach. And if you're really serious about making a change and starting to have the things that you actually want instead of selling for the shit that you've been told that you have to have, then my friend, this is your call forward. Go to lauraora.com/learn. Registration is open and I better see your beautiful ass in there. Yeah, our brain's whole deal is keeping us safe and doing the things that it knows. But the crazy thing is my brain doesn't know that it's not safe to go outside and drink coffee.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Now it's getting easier. I will say that, right? I'll just use myself as a guinea pig here in this conversation. Now I've done it enough times that my brain's like, oh, okay. All right. That thing. Yeah, that actually worked out pretty good the last 80 times we did it. So let's maybe do that again. But you're forming a new habit.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Well, you put on two things, like this touches on two ways to have the breakthrough, essentially. One is you have the repetition that shows your mind enough times the reward that we get if we do this. So it comes to expect it. Because at the moment, if you're not going outside or you're doing it irregularly, then it's, well, I don't really remember. This feels a lot better to just stay put. And it's the same thing with, I gave up coffee after 15 years of drinking it.
Wow.
And I tried the whole, oh, I'm going to just have coffee once a week. It's fine. And then I went right back to it, right back. What actually shifted for me was every single day not doing it. And the second part of this is I replaced the habit with the habit. And that's the easiest way. That is a shortcut. It's what habit can you replace the habit with? If your habit is scrolling on social media, figuring out what is the trigger for that. Is it you're feeling anxious, you don't want to do something, and what is the reward from it? I feel release, I feel connected to people, and then substituting that with a different habit that can satisfy the same trigger, but also give you the same benefit or better if possible.
I love that you brought this up because I think sometimes we try to break a habit, but we don't replace it with anything. And from a neuroscience standpoint, those wires in our brain, they need something new to attach to, right? When we do the same thing over and over again, in your case, it was coffee, in my case, scrolling, right? Like whatever it is that you're doing consistently, to change that neuro pathway needs something else to attach to. And so by creating a new habit, doing something different, replacing it, you are more likely to actually change that behavior than if you don't replace it with anything at all. Now, of course, we want to be intentional, right? It's I'm certainly not in the medical field by any means, but I would imagine that it's why when people quit smoking, they go to eating, because
Yeah.
it's a similar type of satisfaction, right?
Yeah.
And that's not always beneficial. So we have to be intentional about choosing what that replacement is.
Yeah. And also thinking about that brings up an excellent point because you're right. It's not just replacing the habit. It's thinking about why do you do it in the first place? Because if I were a smoker, for example, and then I switch to food, or a lot of people they drink and then they switch to sweets. If you haven't identified why you're doing that in the first place and what you get from it, you've just replaced something with something else. And even if it is healthier comparatively, you haven't identified the actual problem. And so that's why it's important to see, like, if I look for me with coffee, I would have it in the morning and I would look forward to it because it was the only time, and I know the entrepreneurs can relate to this, it was the only time that I didn't feel guilty about not working, when I could
Mm.
just relax. So for me, it was about permission to pause and having a hot drink. And so when I started just switching to decaf tea, or I would do ginger tea sometimes, it was the same reward. Obviously, the chemical pick me up is not the same. I'm not going to pretend. But the reason why I was going for it is satisfied. And that's all that it took. And now it's been 3 or 4 years and I haven't had a cup.
Wow, amazing. So how does one discover the root? How do you find out what the reason is behind your current activities or beliefs or habits?
So this is maybe 2 years ago. I had this addiction psychiatrist come on the show and he was talking about this because I asked this question. I was like, how do you even, we were talking about overeating
Okay.
compulsively. How do you find out why you're doing it? And he was saying the first thing is, and I always thought this was so interesting, it's curiosity. You have to become curious about why you're doing something without the judgment. Because for our minds, the moment you bring judgment in, oh, I'm going to have a cigarette and I shouldn't, you will shut down the processing because it's too painful for you to feel those emotions and you cannot objectively look at what's happening. Versus if you go in and say, okay, why is this happening? Why am I going for this? It can feel a little bit weird and woo woo in the beginning. Why am I doing this? Whatever. But the more you ask that question, you do start to get those answers for why it's happening to you. And so it is continually, every time you're picking it up, figuring out whether it's scrolling or smoking or whatever, why am I doing this? What is it bringing me?
Yeah, and I think it's such a beautiful way to look at what's going on, because the other thing our brain wants to do is immediately like make it everything wrong, right? Now I'm now I have this problem. Now I have to fix this. Now I've screwed up again, right? Like that's a whole nother track record. Whereas curiosity, it just extinguishes that stuff, right? Or at least if you start going in that direction, curiosity just softens it in a really cool way where it's like, oh, I'm just kind of interested. I'm just kind of poking around, right? It's like shopping at the store. I don't really need anything at Target, but I'm just kind of browsing and seeing what might be here for me. You know what I mean? So I love that is a great tool to shift the focus of the energy behind what's going on.
Yeah. And it's a way too where you kind of pointed this out just now very well, which is if you stay open and curious about what's happening, your mind can open up and notice things that judgment would hide. And it's very similar to that phenomenon of, you're thinking of, I don't know, like cats, right? You're thinking of cats and then you see them everywhere. Your mind focuses on that. If you open up, you can have the reverse effect. I'm not thinking of any animals, right? As an example. And therefore, I see multiple ones. And that's the same thing when you're trying to analyze your behavior, because probably you don't consciously know why you're doing it. You might subconsciously know, but you don't consciously know. And the only way you're going to get those answers is if you go into the introspection without expectations, assumptions, or judgment. And so it is being very curious of like, why is this happening? Why am I doing it? And not even stopping yourself while you're doing it. So if you're smoking, not stopping smoking, but actually just reflecting as you're doing it, because you might find as you engage in the behavior more, the answers start to come. Same with scrolling or whatever the habit is.
Oh, I love that. That is a very powerful because again, our brains want to like stop right there and we're going to make this mean something. But even during it, right, when you're not making it mean anything, you're just getting curious about learning about it and noticing it in the moment because a lot of the stuff is very autopilot, right? You're not even thinking about doing the thing, you're just doing the thing.
Yeah. And it's punishment too. If you think about it, if you say, oh, I'm going to start examining why I'm on social media all the time, therefore, when I go on it, I'm going to stop, that your brain has interpreted that as punishment. And we
Mm.
always want to avoid that, which means the next time you go into scroll, you are not going to reflect on it. But if you don't have that immediate punishment of stopping the action, it allows you to continue to do this. And you will find, like I did with my job, that at some point the pain point or the realization allows you to shift out of it.
Mm. So once you've gotten kind of curious, you've maybe discovered the root or have a little bit better understanding about yourself. What does that give you the power to do then? How do you use that information to make a change?
That allows you to replace the habit or the thought with something else. And I say thoughts too, because we have certain thoughts that we habitually think. Oftentimes, they are very demoralizing about our self worth, whatever it is. And it's the same thing that once you're aware of why you're doing it or what triggers it, if you're feeling loneliness and that's when you go on social media, then you can start to identify the need and say, okay, what are some other ways I can satisfy that? And maybe you can do it alone. Some people, they need to get support. They go to a therapist or whoever, and that is completely okay. It just depends on the person, but that allows you to replace and shift into something different. And you cannot do that if you don't first identify what's happening.
Oh, that's so true. Otherwise, you're just pulling straws and hoping for the best. And sometimes you pull the right one, but it can be a windy journey. And I think too that giving yourself permission to try and experiment, right? Like if the one thing that you try to replace it with or to shift it to doesn't work or doesn't stick, try something else, right? Like it doesn't have to become a whole new thing that you beat yourself up about.
At all, because it could be totally, for example, if we take the coffee, right? Maybe for other people, they still want the caffeine and it works to have a matcha. Or maybe it works for them to just cut it down and have it at different times of the day. Like there's different ways that this can play out for you. But if you just think, oh, the only answer is I can only have no caffeine ever again, then it's going to be a lot harder for you to experiment and find what works for you. And as I said, this was my second time trying. Like the first time I tried, it didn't work. So I think the experimentation part is really important that you mentioned.
Yeah. And another one that I like to talk about is just perpetuating thoughts of self-doubt, right? Beating ourselves up, I can't do this. I'm not good enough. I don't like how I look. I'm too big for this. I'm too small for that. Like, gosh, that inner bully just really loves to come to the front of our minds. Let's talk about that a little bit. First, what's going on and how do we start to shift some of that?
Oh, this is fresh in my mind. So I just did I recorded an episode yesterday about this where I had went in recently to get a new pair of jeans. And I went up 4 sizes from what I remembered. And it could have been very triggering. And those thoughts could have started of, what have you done? How did you let this happen? You're not attractive. All these thoughts that we have in these situations. And it didn't happen to me this time because of the years of work that I did to not dive into those thoughts, which is a question you're asking. Like, how do you stop those? How do you get out of that? And the first thing is recognizing what's happening, which is we have a confirmation bias where you have a thought or an idea about yourself already. It could be based on what people tell you or what you yourself have said. In everything that you see and experience in life, you will interpret through that lens. So you will look for proof that you are not attractive, that you are too big, that you shouldn't be wearing this, that you are too old for that. You will look for proof and you will find it because our minds are dedicated to it. And so when you recognize that you're doing that, it allows you to stop for a moment and say, oh, I see I'm looking for proof here. I see that I'm ignoring this compliment and looking at this criticism instead. We do this as entrepreneurs all the time. How many times do you get a hate comment that you notice and none of the beautiful feedback you get? So noticing that you have a tendency to do that and some of the other cognitive distortions or different ways we think, very key.
Hmm. Catching it. I
Yes.
I listen, I will preach that from the rooftops of every home in this world. You've got to build awareness. You have to notice. If you don't notice, it continues.
Yeah.
Literally.
Because it's like, I feel that a lot of people have this misconception that it's possible to just never have these thoughts again. Do you feel like people think
Oh,
that?
absolutely. Well, yeah, and then let's insert, now we have a new thing to beat ourselves up about because oh my
Yeah.
gosh, I'm doing this again. Oh my
Yeah.
gosh, I've done all this work and why am I thinking this bad thing about my body? Oh my gosh, I have done so many things and read all the books. Why am I going back to an old habit? You know what I mean? Like we just have this expectation that it's all or nothing. It's here or it's fixed.
Yeah. And
And
it's not.
it's really not. I mean, I always tell people like I cannot stop you from overthinking. I can give you tools to help you shorten that time frame so you don't get stuck in that shit. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? Like I mean, think about it. Like we are ever evolving. Every day is different. You're trying new things, you're growing in different ways, you're expanding your network, you're talking to new people, you're expanding your business, right? Like the variables change every day, so it would make sense that some of that stuff pops up.
Come and you can't, like, I think you're right because you can't, every day is different. There's different inputs that are coming in. There's different ways you need to respond. And it's not about eradicating, it's about reducing, preventing, and shifting. And you do those things and it's completely a different reality. So like if I go to the jeans incident, I had the thought for a moment of like, fuck, what's happening here? Right? Like, this is after how many years of feeling pretty comfortable in my body. But then I shut that down and I was like, well, whatever, we go the next size up. It's not a big deal. Like, nobody sees the size tags but me. What does it matter? And it's the same thing with any thought you have, any self doubt you have. Your goal is really just to create tools and a practice of preventing managing, shifting, reducing, not to completely eradicate, because it's like a muscle. And if you think about for how decades you've had a certain way of thinking and using that muscle, and now you have to unlearn that, it's not going to happen instantaneously in the first 60 days.
Yeah. An example that just kind of popped in my mind is I go to a chiropractor, and at one point we talked about changing the way that I sleep, right? And you think about it, if you've been sleeping in the same position for maybe your entire life, to go to all of a sudden sleeping in a very different position, it's so unnatural to you and it's uncomfortable. And you're like, I don't want this. I just want to click back into what I know. And that's really what's happening in your mind with everything. It wants to click back into what it knows. And when we're changing things, we're going against what it knows, and it's not bad. Your brain just temporarily thinks that it is. And it's uncomfortable. You know what I mean? It's uncomfortable. But with that repetition, with replacing, with catching that stuff in the moment, and over and over and over again, eventually it becomes your new norm.
What did you do I was going to ask you, like, what worked for you to shift that pattern of sleeping?
So I modified it, because the way that they were recommending, I just didn't feel aligned with it. You know what I mean? Like it made me feel worse in different ways. And I think that that's important to recognize too, like when something just isn't for you. But I could recognize that the original position was not working either. So I'm like, okay, how can I improve this without it being so like, right? So I modified it, right? I got a different type of pillow. I have just a different setup, just different tools that I use. And it feels better, right? And I'm getting better sleep, and I have better posture, supporting my neck in a different way, but I'm not forcing myself to do something that my body just really didn't want to do.
This is an amazing example, because you changed the environment, you got the props to support you, you personalized it to work. And something else you said, which this is why, so for the longest time I used to do fitness coaching, and one of the biggest reasons why people really struggled to enjoy exercise and to do it, and it's the same with any habit or anything, is they didn't do it long enough to see the benefits. So you did sleep changing and you started noticing less pain, better posture. These benefits make you want to continue to modify your sleep. But if you hadn't experimented long enough to see those benefits, then the pain of shifting might not have been worth it to you. And that is a really big part, is you need to have the time to be able to try something like the integration we talked about, so that you can see those benefits, because otherwise your brain's going to shut down and say, nope, this isn't working. We're not happy. This is painful. Let's go back to what we know and what has worked for decades sometimes.
Absolutely. Listen, Chardét, I could talk to you for days about this stuff. This is a topic that I personally nerd out on and love to expand on, but our time here is short today. So I want to make sure that everyone knows, where can they connect and find you? And if there's an offer, I'd love to hear what that is for them.
Amazing. Yeah. So I've got 2 shows depending on what your interest is, 2 podcasts. One is Feel Good Naked. That's all things mindset, burnout, wellness, health. And then the other one is Her First 3 Years. And you can search both of those and find them. That one is more for entrepreneurs, kind of the unfiltered look at the journey.
Look, that's a huge need. That's where this podcast was born. And it will continue to be a topic that is needed to be talked about. So thank you so much for your time and your energy. My final question for you is, what does gutsy mean to you?
Gutsy for me is courage to act even when you have fear, which is maybe slightly below the level of acting. You can go above that fear and still do it.
I love it. We'll make sure that we have the links to all your fabulous places and podcasts in the show notes. And I can't thank you enough for being here.
Thank you.
This is a conversation that is very near and dear to my heart, to the point where I know that without understanding how to shift your mind, making any kind of change is always going to feel like an uphill battle. So if you're new around here, or maybe this is new to you, if you go to lauraora.com/foundations, I will send you 5 days of free audio, 20 minutes apiece, teaching you the foundational method to learn how to get out of your own way so that you can move forward. I'd love to know, what did you take away from today? What shifted in your mind or body? You can reach out on Facebook, TikTok, or Instagram. You can find me using @thatlauraora. And as always, until I see you next time, stay gutsy.